Well, hey, it's Heidi. Oh, this is going to be so much fun. Broke out the globe for you. We are going to talk about where does your coffee come from that you're drinking? Let's find out. Well, hey, it's Heidi. Now grab a cup of coffee and pull up a chair because we are talking about coffee. Where's the coffee you're drinking coming from? Where does coffee come from? I know. I'm Heidi Dulabon. I'm an international cultural consultant and etiquette expert, and we are talking about where coffee comes from. Now, I did another video, and the link is below. Please check it out if you haven't already. It's more of a timeline of the history of coffee. It goes more into detail, but I just want to give you a brief version today well, let's just sum it up. You've got to stay tuned to this because it is so interesting. Coffee is a Muslim creation that was influenced by the Chinese, spanned the world by Europeans, eventually adopted by Christians, and then spread around the world, grown around the world, and enjoyed by everybody. And now here I am sitting in my home in the United States enjoying my cup of joe. So it's a ride, you guys. The story of coffee is absolutely amazing. So it starts where does it all begin? Coffee all begins in East Africa, in the country where the birthplace of man is also the birthplace of coffee. We are talking Ethiopia. And I've brought my globe here to show you Ethiopia. Yes, Ethiopia, coffee grew wild there. So what happened? Cool story. It's a myth, but go with me on this, okay? There's a goat herder. His name is Kaldi. One day he's herding his goats up the mountain as he does. He's a poet. He plays the flute and he's sitting around trying to compose a poem and playing a little flute, and he looks over and his goats are going crazy. They're eating some berries off this bush and they're up on their hind legs and they're dancing. And Kaldi's like, oh my gosh, what's happened? What's going on? He's all upset. He gets the goats home. He goes down the mountain, gets them home, secures them for the night, goes to bed, wakes up the next morning thinking, oh, these goats are all going to be dead. Now what? Oh, he goes out. The goats are fine. The goats are fine, but they're raring to get back up that mountain. They want more of those berries. So they all go up and Kaldi's there and the goats run right to the bush and they start eating these berries again. And Kaldi thinks, well, they didn't die. I might as well eat one myself. Let's go. So he starts eating the berries, and the next thing he knows, poetry is flowing out of his mouth and beautiful music's flowing out of his flute. And thinks, oh my gosh, okay, coffee is born. Well, the historians think, that story was probably around 850 or so, but people were probably chewing coffee berries before that. This grew in the Kaffa region of Ethiopia. Well, time goes on, and then there are some slave routes, and they're going around the world. There's some trade routes going on, and a very interesting thing is, I think it's the first energy bars, first power bars, they would take, and back in these slave trade days and early trading days, they would take some ghee, some fat, and they would add coffee berries and a bunch of spices, and they had these balls and they could keep them in their pockets for days. And so they got some fat, some energy, and the caffeine, from which they didn't know till the 1800s, put a label on it. They knew it was something in there, but until the 1800s did we have the word caffeine. So they're eating these berries and they're moving, and they end up from Ethiopia. They go across the narrow area of the Red Sea, and they go into Yemen, the country of Yemen. And Yemen starts adopting coffee, and they're nuts about it, and they start growing it, and they have a coffee rush. Much like the American gold rush, Yemen has a coffee rush. And all these farmers rush to Yemen to start growing coffee on these steep mountains, and they terrace all these mountains to grow this coffee. And they even build these multi-storied basically early apartments. They were 4 or 5 story tall buildings to house all these coffee farmers. And there's this really cool, mysterious, sort of a mystic sect of Muslims called the Sufis. And these marvelous Sufis, they were, they were the whirling dervishes. And these Sufis, they were a very learned sect. They were not cloistered. They went home at night to their families, but they were scholars. They were tradespeople. They had shops. They traveled. They were very well-traveled people. And they start eating this coffee, and then they started throwing them in the fire because they had these all-night, cut. Excuse me, you guys. Cut, please. I got too excited. Cut, please. Okay. Here we go. So the Sufis started putting coffee, they threw the berries into the fire, and they started eating them, and it kept them up at night because they had these religious ceremonies called dikkers that went on all night long, and it helped keep them awake. And then, now I said, coffee was influenced by the Chinese. Okay, so how was that? Well, during some of the fleets, the Chinese were building an observatory in China, and they knew about the Sufis, and they knew how learned they were, and the Chinese were out on sort of these knowledge expeditions, and they wrote to the Sufis, and they said, we want to see if some of you would come back to China with us and help us, and we can exchange some information. And the Sufis said, sounds great, and they did. And when they get to China, they notice that the Chinese are plucking these leaves and from these trees, and they put these leaves, they steep them in boiling water, and then they are drinking it. And by the way, they have these very nice little tiny porcelain cups that are very white inside, showed off this beautiful color of this Chinese, guess what, tea. So the Sufis think, well, that's pretty cool. So Sufis, when they go back home and they think, okay, well, forget this, we're going to roast these things. Now let's steep them. Let's put them in some boiling water. So there you go. Thanks to the Chinese, we started boiling water. And do you know, for many, many years, our early coffee cups were just like the early Chinese teacups, that very common to the ones you find today in Chinese restaurants. Just the cup, no handle. Pretty cool. So then, things are going great in Yemen, and we have the port of Mocha. Yes, Mocha is not a chocolate coffee drink. Mocha is a port in Yemen. And for 150 years, it was the hot spot exporting port around the world. Mocha. The Ottomans come in. The Ottomans sort of take control of Yemen, and they said, listen, we are going to take control of this whole coffee thing because it is something else, and they will allow roasted coffee to leave through the port of Mocha, but no green plants or green coffee cherries because it could be planted somewhere else. They wanted to keep a monopoly on it. But of course, things get smuggled, and that's a whole nother story. Check out the other video, please. And it basically, the Dutch East India, the Dutch, the East India, the Brits, they sail in, and they are sailing out with coffee, and it gets spread around the world. Smugglers do get plants out, and the different countries have the plants are planted in their colonies, just like the Dutch end up planting. It didn't grow so well in the Netherlands. They end up taking it to their colonies in Indonesia, and it grew very well in, guess where? Java. There you go. Okay, so this is sort of the story, and then through there it grew, went to around the world, to Spain and to Portugal, and from there it found its way to the #1 coffee growing country today. By far, this country grows so much coffee. It grows over 37% of the world's coffee. This country grows so much coffee that the next top four coffee producing countries in the world, all four together don't add up to what this #1 country does. #1 country in the world for growing coffee is, I give you, Brazil. Yes, Brazil. Coffee found its way there through Portugal and Spain, through the trade, and now it has been grown there for a long time. It is amazing how coffee is grown there. It's really, truly amazing. And with climate change, they're doing tons of work to make sure that the coffee still will be grown okay, because there's two types of coffee. The most common is Arabica, which is the most delicate. It likes hot days and cool nights. It's really great at elevation. And Robusta, which is it's robust. It can stand much hotter, tougher climates. But Brazil, they grow both in Brazil, but there's a lot of Arabica there, so they're working on that. And very interesting enough, all ages of people drink coffee in Brazil, all ages, young and old. And it is one of the top, it's in the top 20 of the coffee consuming countries in the world. So coffee grown in Brazil, number one. So where else is coffee grown? Well, we'll get to the other top 5 here, but coffee is basically grown in what we call the bean belt. It's the belt around the equator between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. And this belt is where coffee is grown, because that is the most conducive, the climate, to growing coffee. So what are the other coffee growing countries? Well, coming in at number 2 is Vietnam. Oh, that's a whole story about coffee being grown in Vietnam. They came in after the Vietnam War. They came in with a vengeance. Brazil had a bad crop year, bad growing conditions, and they came in like crazy. They have huge quantity. The quality maybe isn't as great as everywhere else, but some of it is. So number 2 is Vietnam. Number 3 is Colombia. I know so many people think Colombia is the largest coffee growing company. No, it's number 3, followed by, hey, this makes sense, Indonesia. Remember, we're just talking about Java. And number 4 is, guess where? Yes, our friends in where it all began, Ethiopia. So they grow the most coffee in the world, followed by all these other people that are making a living, and somehow, some way, 500,000 of us are involved with coffee through transportation or growing or packing or some sort of way. And now it all comes down to us enjoying our cup of coffee. And it is just such a delight. I hope that you're enjoying coffee. I wish you were here with me, because I would share this with you. I have this lovely friend, and she knows how into coffee I am, and she brought me some actual coffee from Yemen. Yes, this is Yemeni coffee, and it's a real treat, because with all the strife and conflict and war in Yemen, to even grow the coffee and to export it, to get it out, is really something. So it went all that way around the world, all the way to me here in the United States, and I am enjoying every single sip. So I hope this was interesting to you. Drop me a comment if you like the video. Please like the video. And if you'd be so kind, please subscribe to my channel. We can just talk about so many neat things. We can talk about coffee and the etiquette and the origin stories, and just really appreciate our world. Because isn't that what we all really want to do? Just appreciate each other? Okay, you're awesome. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, everyone. And as I always say, please be kind. Thank you. Cheers.